Thank you for staying with us. It is time now to take a look at stories making headlines on the front page of Nigerian newspapers. And I begin with this Nigerian newspaper. The major story here says, let old naira notes coexist with new notes, Supreme Court rules. Let old naira coexist with new notes, Supreme Court rules to determine substantive suit, February the 15th. Federal government objects to judgment. Rivers opt to join Kogi, Kaduna, Zamfara in case. You find all the details on the front page of this Nigeria newspaper. And to the front page of the Business Day now. Pressure mounts 1 day to old naira deadline. Pressure mounts 1 day to old naira deadline. Supreme Court, IMF seek extension. Buhari summons Council of State meeting. All the details on the front page of the Business Day. And to the Daily Trust now. Naira crisis. Federal government files objection against Supreme Court decision. Buhari receives Emefiele Malami after Apex Court ruling. Experts proffer solution as IMF seeks deadline extension. 2.6 trillion naira in circulation, not too much. 2.6 trillion naira in circulation, not too much. Find details on the front page of the Daily Trust. And to the blueprints now. Naira redesign controversy. Kudos knocks Supreme Court holds policy. Tinubu lots governors. El-Rufai says it's opportunity for review. No, it's erosion of CBN's independence. Waleke speaking. Ruling will ease tension for peaceful election. Adefolari. IMF waits in, urges federal government to extend deadline. Buhari meets Emefiele. Mike.
All right, I have the Nation here, and it says relief, joy, as Supreme Court holds CBN deadline on old naira. Relief, joy, as Supreme Court holds CBN deadline on old naira. That's what the Nation newspaper has in there. And from there, let's go to Daily Independent. Daily Independent says naira swap policy, mixed reactions, greets Supreme Court suspension of February 10 deadline. Mixed reactions. Greet Supreme Court suspension of February 10 deadline. That's what Daily Independent has. From there, let's go to Nigeria News Direct. Nigeria News Direct is still re-echoing the same thing. Naira swap, heavy protest rocks CBN headquarters over Supreme Court ruling. All right, heavy protest rocks CBN headquarters over Supreme Court ruling. That's what News Direct has in there. Buhari, Emefiele in closed-door meeting. All right, and the Supreme Court bars federal government from February 10 deadline. All right, extend February 10 deadline, revisit a cashless policy. Governors are saying this, all right? All this you see on the front page of News Direct. The Guardian newspaper says naira swap. Federal government insists on February 10, asks Apex Court to dismiss state suit. Right? Federal government insists on February 10, asks Apex Court to dismiss state suit. That's on the naira swap. You see that on the front page of the Guardian newspaper. Leadership is next. Naira swap deadline. Governors, CSOs, civil society organizations differ on Supreme Court judgment. Right, credible election under attack, civil groups declare. You see that on the front page of the Leadership newspaper. Federal government asks Apex Court to dismiss state government suit as governors hail the verdict. It saved Nigeria from anarchy, economic shutdown. Tinubu is saying this. All that you see on the front page of the Leadership newspaper. Governors, Supreme Court, CSOs differ on Supreme Court judgment. The Punch newspaper is the last one I'm looking at right now. The Punch says on the new naira note, World Bank, IMF warns CBN, Supreme Court stops Friday deadline. World Bank, IMF warns CBN, and Supreme Court stops Friday deadline. Shortage of new notes has caused hardships, disrupted trade payments. IMF is saying this, and protest rocks Abuja as Tinubu, El-Rufai hail judgment, and Malami asks court to dismiss the suit. All right, that's what you see on the front page of the Punch newspaper. Veronica?
Right, Mike. Let's look at this matter. Still talking about the cash crunch and all of the cases of, for the courts with regards to this matter of the cash crunch. Recall that some days ago, some political parties had gone to the courts to say that if there is an extension of the deadline, which is tomorrow, that they were not going to participate in the elections.
They'll boycott
the elections.
Yeah.
And then some governors, talking about the Kaduna State Governor, Kogi State Governor, and Zamfara State Governor, had approached the Supreme Court to see to the extension of the deadline from tomorrow, because they said the hardship on their citizens was too much and they had to do something. And now the federal government and the Supreme Court ruled in their favor. But then the federal government is saying, through the Attorney General of the Federation, that the Supreme Court lacks jurisdiction to do so, to rule in that effect. And so that that ruling perhaps cannot stand as it is. Initially, when a lot of Nigerians saw that ruling from the Supreme Court, they were happy. Some were relieved. It was a mixed reaction. There were those who were saying, no, this is going to erode, the independence of the CBN and all of it. There were those who were saying, no, this is the Supreme Court was swinging in the direction of some politicians who were taking advantage of the situation. But then there are Nigerians who are saying, we do not have money. We let us have access to our monies.
What I see there, when we talk about the powers, the jurisdiction, we all know that the Supreme Court is the final arbiter, is the biggest court in the land, is the final, where the moment the Supreme Court has ruled on anything, it supersedes whatever any other court in the land comes up with. Right. Now, of course, I'm not a lawyer, so I wouldn't know the nuances around all of that. But the Supreme Court, from what I see, is coming to salvage the situation where anarchy and chaos becomes the order of the day in the land. So I wouldn't see it as pandering to favor anybody per se, because the realities are there. From Oyo State, Ogun State, Edo State, Ondo State, Delta, we started seeing some of this, protests and so on. And in order to prevent a situation where we have a repeat of the NSAS that created a lot of hardship and took Nigeria backwards in so many instances, the Supreme Court, in its own wisdom, decided to act. Of course, if there was if no case was brought before the Supreme Court, of course, like they say, the courts are not Father Christmas. They're not going to act on their own. But when a case is brought to say, okay, look at these reasons why this has to be. Now, when Nigerians sometimes analyze the country based on what happens in Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt, or in Kano, it is totally inadequate sometimes. If you go to the hinterlands, you go to the villages, go to in so many of these states, and you see what is happening there, it tells you that it's totally a different scenario from when you analyze economies in Obalende, for instance, or in Ikeja, or in Buhari in Abuja. So the point there is that when these realities are there, these were the things that the Supreme Court, the governors of this brought before the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And videos have already gone viral. The news is there. All the reports are there. That protests, in fact, people were being shot. Of course, we heard a lot of persons were injured from all of the protests. So how recall 2 days ago, I think it was yesterday, Sam was saying that it is baffling how all of these things are happening.
They're uneasy,
calm. They're uneasy, they calm. The federal government, they seem there's no urgency to anything. At this time, we expect that a 24-hour meeting can be held where decisions can be taken, and then in 2-3 days, Nigerians see the action. But the president said we should give him 7 days. And within that 7 days, we were thinking that, of course, some palliatives or some things would have been done until the outcome of whatever that the committee will come up with. But no, nothing is happening until we're going to wait for the meeting to be held on Friday before they come up with whatever they're coming up with. So the status quo remains. And while we're waiting for the 7 days, People are being injured. People are starving.
There are those, someone who collapsed and died.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the point there is the Supreme Court is saving the day and ensuring that anarchy and chaos doesn't become the order of the day. From my own perspective, that is how I see it. All right. Those who will say, okay, the Supreme Court lacks jurisdiction, of course, the issue of CBN, of course, CBN has total independence. But there is, your independence is still limited within the law. So there are these issues, these nuances of the issues of the law. So the technicalities, I think we should leave all of those techniques aside and face the reality of what the everyday man is facing.
Going through.
Because that is more important in some instances. In fact, in most instances, because if that law and order breaks down, these technicalities and all of that will only be in the air. They will only be mirages. It won't mean anything. Because we're talking of human beings. Technicality is for who? Is it for the air or is it for the birds? It's still for the human. Is it for human beings? It's to create order. So when that order breaks down, then you will see how the technicalities of whatever
what is avoidable. Why not avoid what is avoidable in the first place than trying to manage when something has broken down as it is now? Because that is where the Supreme Court seems to be coming in. Let's manage to ensure that there is no breakdown of law and order while you are still trying to have your meetings.
Exactly. So the Supreme Court is not necessarily interfering in anything. It's just to say, okay, let us make a consideration. And moreover, it's a temporary measure. They are not saying, CBN, you cannot do this. That's not what they're saying. Yeah, but the deadline, shift it a little bit, and let us see how some of these things, make these things available. The old and new naira note, let them coexist side by side for a little while. So all of these things are things that we are expecting that
when they have that meeting tomorrow, they would look into all of this, and that will determine where they swing at the end of the day, because the governors are the closest to the people and they understand what is going on. The CBN governor, yes, the CBN governor might not understand, because you cannot just...
Anyway, the CBN also has branches in all states. They must have...
They do not relate as closely as the governors would.
Of course.
The governors get information every day on what is going on in their states. The CBN offices and branches across the state does not. They only relate with people who come to run services with them. That's all they do. So it is important that we pay attention to what is going on and not just begin to politicize anything at this time, because the realities are on the ground. But we hope that the government will look into the needful and do the needful as time goes on. We are waiting tomorrow, counting down already.